it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. Romans chapter 10, verse 10. If we want to be holy, we must live holiness. But the false teachers inside and outside the church will tell us that we should keep it private, that we should not go public with holiness. But we should go public with our holiness, if we have holiness. No matter how unpopular it may be, we must let others know all that the Lord does for us. Paul writes that what we believe and what God has done in our lives should not be hidden. In fact, Paul says going public with our faith is a part of our faith. Paul employs a typical method of Hebrew poetry that we can find in the Psalms quite often. That is to set up two statements that are parallel in pattern, in meaning, and interpretation of each other. Paul's first line is, with your heart you believe and are justified. Then his second line is, with your mouth you profess what you believe, you are saved. One line expands and interprets the other. What we have in our hearts we must say with our mouths. What we believe we must say we believe. Going public with what we believe in our hearts is a part of believing. When we have something in our hearts at the center of our lives, it cannot be hidden. Faith cannot be kept behind locked doors or closed mouths. What is at the core of my faith is revealed in my life. If I live a holy life, it will be public. Holiness must be public. The world will try to cloister holiness, put it in a ghetto or behind closed doors. Don't let it happen. The world will use ridicule and mockery. It will encourage us to go to the popular or safe route. Don't let the world succeed. Go public. Now, there are positive and productive ways to go public with holiness, and there are ways that are not so positive or productive. There's a difference between adjusting our message for our context and just completely detracting from the message. We can adjust our message to our audience, but we cannot present the message in a way that does not fit us or the message. Paul tells us how he adjusts the message to his context. Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone, to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew, to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 through 23. Do you remember the billboards that used to be all along our highways? The world certainly ridicules these efforts. I don't doubt the sincerity of persons who try to spread the good news of God's love in Jesus Christ with these methods, but I do wonder how productive these efforts are. There is another way to go public. Of course, a personal message is much better, except for the look on his face. Do you remember the John 3:16 guy who used to show up at sporting events? Soon John 3:16 messages were appearing everywhere. Roland Frederick Stewart is the name of the John 3:16 guy. Stewart became a born-again Christian and was determined to get the message out through television. His first major appearance was at the 1977 NBA Finals. By the time of the 1979 Major League Baseball All-Star Game, broadcasters actively tried to avoid showing him. He appeared behind NFL goalposts, near Olympic medal stands, and even at the Augusta National Golf Club. At the 1982 Indianapolis 500, he was behind the pits of the race winner. Stewart was briefly jailed by Moscow police at the 1980 Summer Olympics. Soon this ministry began to consume and change his life. In the late 1980s, Stewart began a string of stink bomb attacks. Targets included Robert Schuller's Crystal Cathedral, the Orange County Register, the Trinity Broadcasting Network, and a Christian bookstore. Stewart was married 4 times. During the 1984 World Series, he assaulted his wife for standing in the wrong place with her John 3:16 sign. Now, I'm not making fun of Mr. Stewart. I just want to make the point that there are positive and productive ways to go public with holiness, and ways that are not so positive and productive. The world uses these extreme persons to scare you and me away from going public. Still, I wonder if it might work. Well, probably not. That's not who I am. When we go public with holiness, we must do so with integrity, truthfulness, definitely, and completely. We profess we go public clearly and definitely with all that God does for us. We first go public with holiness by living it and enjoying it. When we enjoy it and live it, we let others know. Jesus says no one lights a lamp and hides it in a clay jar or puts it under a bed. Instead, they put it on a stand so that those who come in can see the light. Luke chapter 8, verse 16. This teaching is so important that Jesus repeats it again. No one lights a lamp and puts it in a place where it will be hidden or under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand so that those who come in may see the light. Luke chapter 11, verse 33. If God sets His great light in our souls, then we do not have the right to cover it up. Let it shine. God encourages others through us to come to Him for the fullness of His grace of holiness. The best, most effective witness that we have of the power and grace of holiness from God is that witness that is made in the context of our relationships. We reflect God's love and the blessing of a holy life to others by living a holy life toward others and in the midst of others, with those who know us. All your works praise you, Lord. Your faithful people extol you. They tell of the glory of your kingdom and speak of your might, so that all people may know of your mighty acts and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Psalm 145, verses 10 through 12. Paul tells us, we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making His appeal through us. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 20. A holy life is preeminently the work of God. It is a creation that God's power alone can effect. It is the glory of His kingdom. Nothing praises God more than letting others know about the way of holiness. Jesus teaches us, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 25. There are ways to go public that have good foundations. Joyfully, with integrity, truthfully, completely, within healthy relationships, with love toward others, and with love for God. Jesus continues, Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Matthew 7:26 through 27. There are ways to go public with holiness that do not have a good foundation. Jesus says, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Matthew 7, verses 15 through 18. Some persons lack temperance. Early in this series, I noted that one of the fruits of holiness is control of the appetite. Temperance can mean abstinence, but really it means moderation. Simply put, it is self-control. Some lack self-denial. Their lives are on the path of least resistance. I got drawn into an argument once with someone who firmly believed that since water flowed down, then all rivers flowed south, because on the map, north is up and south is down. If you look at a map of the United States, it certainly looks that way, unless you consider the Snake and Columbia rivers in the northwest. I asked this person, what about the Nile? Water does not travel southward. It travels downward and along the line of least resistance. The path of holiness walked with Jesus is not along the easy way. Some seek to conform to the world, but Paul warns us, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Some lack love. They may know their doctrine, but they have not love. Love never fails. Prophecies will cease, tongues will be stilled, knowledge will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 8 through 13. A profession of holiness without love is like a well without water, like a fireplace without fire, like a tree without fruit. It is empty and worthless. If your experience of holiness is an empty experience, seek first of all perfection in love. God is ready to pour His abundant love into your life. Then begin to live this life filled abundantly with God's love before God and toward others. Start with those closest to you. Do not wonder if you have enough love or faith. Start small. Start small if you must, but start. Again, Jesus said, what shall we say the kingdom of God is like, or what parable shall we use to describe it? It is like a mustard seed, which is the smallest of all seeds on earth. Yet when planted, it grows and becomes the largest of all garden plants, with such big branches that the birds can perch in its shade. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, verses 30 through 32.